You don't miss them the way you think you do. That's the part no one tells you. You sit there replaying everything, the way they looked at you when they were close, the way they spoke when they softened, the moments that felt almost perfect, and it feels like love. It feels deep. It feels rare. But what you're actually feeling isn't just connection, it's withdrawal. It's the silence after intensity. It's your mind trying to recreate a high it once felt but can't consistently get anymore. And that's why it hurts the way it does. Because this isn't just about them leaving or pulling away. This is about your brain getting hooked on something unpredictable, something inconsistent, something that never fully belonged to you but gave you just enough to believe it could. And now you're stuck in this loop where you keep asking yourself why you can't let go of someone who keeps hurting you, someone who keeps choosing distance over closeness, someone who made you feel everything and nothing at the same time. And the answer is uncomfortable. You're not just attached to them, you're addicted to the way they made you feel when they were finally there. Because when they were present, it wasn't ordinary, it wasn't stable, it wasn't predictable, it wasn't safe in the traditional sense. It was intense, it was consuming, it felt like something you had to earn, and when you finally got their attention, even in small doses, it felt like a reward, like you had done something right, like you mattered. And your brain doesn't forget that. It locks onto it, it starts chasing it. Not the person, the feeling, the validation, the relief of them coming back after distance. That moment when everything feels okay again, even if it never lasts. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop asking whether this relationship is healthy, and you start asking how you can get that feeling back. That's where the addiction begins. That's where it stops being about love and starts being about craving. Because real love doesn't leave you constantly confused. It doesn't make you question your worth every time the other person pulls away. It doesn't train you to accept silence as normal and inconsistency as passion. But when you're in this dynamic, it rewires your perception. You start associating emotional chaos with depth. You start believing that the harder it is to keep someone, the more valuable the connection must be. And every time they come close after creating distance, it reinforces that belief. It tells your brain, this is worth it. This is special, even when it's hurting you, even when it's draining you, even when you're losing parts of yourself just to maintain it. And this is where most people get stuck. Not because they don't see the red flags, not because they don't feel the pain, but because the moments of connection feel so real that they override everything else. Those small windows where they open up, where they show care, where they make you feel seen, those moments become the evidence you cling to. You tell yourself, this is who they really are. And everything else, the distance, the coldness, the inconsistency, you start explaining it away. You start justifying it. Because letting go would mean accepting that those moments weren't enough to build something real, and that's a hard truth to face. But there's something deeper happening underneath all of this, something that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with you. Because this kind of attachment doesn't come out of nowhere. It connects to something familiar, something that existed long before they showed up. A pattern where love wasn't always consistent, where attention wasn't always guaranteed, where you had to feel it slipping away before you fully felt its value. And now, without even realizing it, you're recreating that same emotional environment. Not because you want to suffer, but because it feels known, it feels recognizable. And your mind mistakes familiarity for safety, even when it's painful. So when they pull away, it doesn't just feel like losing them, it feels like losing something deeper, something internal. Something that was already fragile before they entered your life. And that's why you chase. Not because you're weak, not because you don't know better, but because your system is trying to restore something it believes it needs. It's trying to fix a feeling that existed long before this relationship, and the avoidant becomes the trigger for it. The one who activates it, the one who holds the key to that temporary relief. And the most confusing part is that the pain and the connection start to blend together. You can't separate them anymore. The moments that hurt you and the moments that heal you come from the same person. So your brain links them. It starts believing that in order to feel close, you also have to feel the distance. that in order to experience the highs, you have to tolerate the lows. And that belief keeps you stuck. It keeps you hoping. It keeps you waiting for the next moment of closeness, even when the pattern has already shown you exactly how it ends. You start chasing their approval without even noticing it. Every message, every interaction, every small sign of attention becomes something you analyze. You begin adjusting yourself, your words, your behavior, trying to figure out what makes them stay just a little longer. And slowly, without realizing it, your self worth starts depending on how they respond to you. When they're warm, you feel enough. When they're distant, you feel like you've done something wrong. And that cycle creates a dependency that feels impossible to break because now it's not just about them, it's about what their attention says about you. And this is where the addiction tightens its grip because you're no longer just attached to the person. You're attached to what they represent: validation, acceptance, the feeling of being chosen by someone who doesn't choose easily. And that makes it feel more valuable, more meaningful, even though it's inconsistent, even though it's unstable, even though it's hurting you. You tell yourself that if you can just get it right, if you can just understand them better, if you can just be patient enough, things will change. That they'll eventually see your value, that they'll eventually stay, that the version of them you saw in those rare moments will become the norm. But that belief keeps you trapped in potential instead of reality. It keeps you investing in what could be instead of accepting what is. And what is a cycle that keeps repeating itself because every time they pull away, it creates anxiety. And every time they come back, it creates relief. And your brain starts associating them with both. So even when you're hurting, a part of you still wants them, not because they're good for you, but because they've become the source of both the pain and the temporary comfort. And that's exactly how addiction works. You're not crazy for feeling this way. You're not weak for struggling to let go. You're caught in a pattern that was designed to keep you hooked. A pattern built on inconsistency, emotional unpredictability, and just enough connection to keep you from walking away completely. And the more you stay in it, the more it reinforces itself. The more it convinces you that this is what love feels like, but it's not love. It's a loop. A loop where you keep chasing something that only shows up in fragments. A loop where you keep hoping that the person who hurt you will also be the one who heals you. A loop where you lose more of yourself each time you try to hold on to them. And the hardest part is realizing that the thing you're addicted to was never consistent enough to truly be yours. But your mind doesn't let go easily because it remembers how it felt in those moments when everything aligned, when they were present, when they were close, when it felt real. And it keeps chasing that version even when reality keeps proving otherwise. That's why you're still here. That's why it's so hard to walk away. Not because they're the only one for you, not because this is the deepest connection you'll ever have, but because your system got used to the cycle. And breaking that cycle doesn't just mean losing them, it means facing everything underneath it: the patterns, the wounds, the need for validation, the fear of not being chosen. And that's where the real work begins. Not in trying to get them back, not in trying to make them stay, but in understanding why you stayed in something that kept hurting you, and why a part of you still wants it, even now. And once you start seeing that truth clearly, something shifts inside you, but not in the way you expect. It doesn't immediately set you free. It doesn't suddenly make you stop missing them or erase the pull you feel toward them. In fact, sometimes it makes it even harder at first, because now you're aware, now you can see the pattern for what it is. And yet a part of you still wants to go back, still wants to feel that closeness again, still wonders if maybe this time could be different. And that internal conflict, that's where the real struggle begins. Because now it's not just about them anymore, it's about you trying to separate what you feel from what you know. You know the inconsistency hurt you. You know the silence made you anxious. You know you gave more than you received. And yet your emotions don't instantly align with that truth. They lag behind. They hold on to the memory of what felt good, even if it was temporary. And that's what creates the tension inside you. The part of you that's waking up and the part of you that's still attached. Because the attachment didn't just come from what they did. It came from what you believed it meant. Every time they came back, it felt like proof that you mattered, proof that the connection was real, proof that you weren't imagining it. And those moments became the foundation of your hope. Even if they were surrounded by distance and confusion, they still felt significant enough to keep you invested. And now, without those moments, there's a void. Not just because they're gone, but because the validation they gave you is gone too. That feeling of being chosen, even temporarily, created a sense of emotional security that you didn't fully have on your own. So when they disappear, it doesn't just feel like losing them, it feels like losing a part of how you saw yourself. That's why it's so hard to detach. Because on some level, it feels like you're letting go of the only thing that made you feel certain, even if that certainty was fragile. And your mind starts playing tricks on you. It starts highlighting the good moments, replaying the connection, minimizing the pain, trying to convince you that maybe it wasn't that bad, maybe you overreacted, maybe if you just handled things differently, it could have worked. But that's not clarity. That's the addiction trying to pull you back in. That's the part of you that got used to emotional inconsistency trying to recreate the cycle. Because even pain can feel safer than the unknown when it's familiar. Even confusion can feel more comfortable than emptiness when you've been living in it for so long. And this is where you start realizing something deeper. You weren't just attached to them, you were attached to the idea of finally being enough for someone who felt hard to reach. Because if someone like that could fully choose you, fully stay, fully commit, it would validate something inside you on a level that goes beyond the relationship itself. It would feel like proof that you're worthy in a way that no stable, consistent love ever had to prove. And that's why stability can feel underwhelming after this kind of dynamic. Because it doesn't activate that same intensity, it doesn't create the same highs and lows. It doesn't make you question yourself or chase validation. It just exists. It's steady. It's predictable, it's calm. And when your system is used to chaos, calm can feel like something is missing, like something isn't as deep, like something isn't as real. But that feeling isn't truth, it's conditioning. It's what happens when your emotional baseline has been shaped by inconsistency. You start associating love with effort, with struggle, with uncertainty. You start believing that if it's not intense, it's not meaningful. And that belief keeps you drawn to people who can't fully show up for you because they recreate that same emotional environment you've learned to associate with connection. And the hardest part is realizing how much of yourself you adjusted just to stay in it, how many times you silenced your needs because you didn't want to push them away. How many times you accepted less than you deserved because you were afraid of losing the little they were giving you? How many times you told yourself to be patient, to be understanding, to not ask for too much, even when it was costing you your peace? Because deep down you knew, you felt the imbalance, you felt the inconsistency, you felt the way your mood depended on how they showed up. But you stayed anyway, not because you didn't value yourself, but because a part of you believed that if you just held on long enough, it would finally become what you needed it to be. And that belief is powerful. It keeps people stuck for months, sometimes years, because it's not just hope, it's emotional investment. It's everything you've already given, everything you've already felt, everything you've already endured. Walking away doesn't just mean losing them, it means accepting that all of that didn't turn into something stable, and that's a painful realization. So instead, your mind tries to bargain. It tries to find ways to make it work in your head. It reinterprets their behavior. It searches for signs that they care more than they show. It holds on to the smallest moments of warmth as evidence that something real exists underneath the distance. But here's the truth that changes everything. If someone can only give you love in fragments, then what you're attached to isn't a relationship. It's a pattern where you're constantly adjusting, constantly hoping, constantly waiting for consistency that never fully arrives. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the more it shapes how you see yourself. You start believing that this is what you have to accept, that love requires this level of uncertainty, that being chosen is something you have to earn through patience and endurance. But real connection doesn't make you feel like you're constantly on the edge of losing it. It doesn't make you question where you stand. It doesn't make you feel like you have to prove your worth over and over again just to maintain it. And when you begin to understand that, not just logically but emotionally, something starts to shift again. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. You start seeing the pattern more clearly than the person. You start recognizing that what pulled you in wasn't just who they were, but how the dynamic made you feel. And that awareness is where your power starts coming back. Because once you see the cycle, you can't fully unsee it. Even if a part of you still misses them, another part of you now understands why. It understands that the longing isn't just about love, it's about the emotional conditioning that kept you attached. And from that place, you begin to question things differently. Not why don't they choose me, but why did I keep choosing something that hurt me? Not what can I do to get them back, but what part of me felt like this was enough? Those questions are uncomfortable. They force you to look inward instead of outward. They shift the focus from them to you. And that's not easy, because it means facing parts of yourself that you may have been avoiding. The need for validation, the fear of being alone, the belief that love has to be earned. But that's also where real change happens, because the more you understand those parts of yourself, the less control this pattern has over you, the less you feel pulled toward people who can't meet you fully, the less you confuse inconsistency with depth. And slowly you start detaching, not because you forced yourself to stop caring, but because you've started seeing the reality more clearly than the illusion. You've started valuing your peace more than the temporary highs. You've started recognizing that what you were chasing was never consistent enough to truly fulfill you. And that doesn't mean you won't still have moments where you miss them. You will. You'll remember the connection. You'll feel the pull. But now, alongside that feeling, there's awareness, there's understanding, there's a voice inside you that reminds you of the full picture, not just the highlights your mind tries to replay. And that voice, that awareness, is what eventually breaks the cycle. Not all at once, not overnight, but piece by piece, until one day you realize that the hold they had on you isn't as strong anymore, that the need to go back isn't as overwhelming, that the version of yourself who felt dependent on their presence is slowly fading. And in its place, something stronger begins to form. Something more stable. Something that doesn't rely on someone else's inconsistency to feel alive. Because the moment you stop chasing what hurts you is the moment you start reclaiming yourself. And as you start reclaiming yourself, you notice something profound. The more you step back from the constant pull of their unpredictability, the more you start reconnecting with parts of yourself that you forgot existed, the parts that didn't revolve around waiting for their attention, hoping for their validation, or analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning. You begin to remember who you are when your worth isn't tied to someone else's choices. And it's in that quiet, in that space where the addiction used to live, that real clarity begins to take root. Because before, your life had been punctuated by highs and lows that weren't yours to begin with. Every time they pulled away, your heart raced. Every time they returned, you felt relief, as if something inside you depended on it to survive. But now, when you step back and watch the cycle from a distance, you start to see it for what it really is: a loop designed to keep you hooked, to keep you chasing, to keep you unsure. And that recognition is powerful. It doesn't just bring understanding, it brings choice. For the first time, you realize that staying caught in this pattern is optional. And that's when the internal dialogue starts to shift. Before, it was all about them. If only they would stay. If only they would see me. If only they could love me fully. But now your thoughts begin to center on you. What do I need? What makes me feel safe? What brings me peace? And that shift, subtle at first, grows stronger with each moment you resist the pull of inconsistency. It's no longer about chasing someone who can't fully show up. It's about showing up for yourself, fully and without compromise. And yes, there are moments when it still hurts. When you remember the way they used to look at you, the rare moments of closeness that felt like home, the flashes of intimacy that made you believe in possibility, those memories can hit like a wave, making your chest ache and your mind spin with what ifs. And that's normal. That's part of untangling yourself from an emotional addiction. The difference now is that these moments don't dictate your actions. You can feel the longing, acknowledge it, and still choose yourself. That is the profound power of awareness. It doesn't erase the pain, but it prevents it from controlling you because you begin to see the pattern in others too. Not just in this one person, but in the dynamics you've allowed into your life before. You notice the familiar cycles of push and pull, of intensity and absence, of craving and disappointment. And instead of blaming yourself, you start noticing your part. The patterns you repeated, the places where your own needs were silenced, the moments you gave too much in hopes of receiving a fraction back. And that self reflection isn't about shame. It's about liberation. And it's through this lens of liberation that you start making different choices. You stop excusing behavior that once kept you hooked. You stop trying to fix the unfixable. You stop overanalyzing interactions to find meaning where none exists. Instead, you begin to see love and connection for what they truly are, a mutual exchange of care, respect, and consistency, rather than a series of highs and lows meant to keep you craving more. And this is where the real healing begins. And as you continue to step back and prioritize your own emotional well being, you notice a subtle but powerful shift in how you engage with others. You no longer tolerate fragmented attention. You no longer invest in people who are unwilling to meet you halfway. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. And in those moments, you start to understand the difference between someone who hurts you because of who they are and someone who hurts you because of the patterns you've been conditioned to accept. And this understanding brings a sense of freedom that you might not have realized was possible. It doesn't come in the form of a dramatic moment or a sudden breakthrough. It comes quietly, like a calm settling over your internal storm. You stop feeling desperate for attention. You stop feeling that your value depends on being chosen by someone else. You start feeling whole in your own presence, capable of loving yourself fully without needing external validation to fill the gaps. And in that wholeness, you discover a new kind of attraction. Not to chaos, not to inconsistency, but to authenticity. People who are consistent, people who are available emotionally, people who see you, respect you, and engage with you fully. And suddenly, the patterns that once felt familiar no longer appeal. The pull of unpredictability no longer entices you because your emotional system has recalibrated. You've experienced the extremes and now you crave stability, depth, and reciprocity. And yet it's not always linear. There are still moments when the old pull surfaces. Memories of intensity, flashes of longing, whispers of hope. But now you're equipped to recognize them for what they are. Triggers, echoes of a loop you've already begun to dismantle. You can acknowledge the feelings without acting on them, without allowing them to dictate your choices. You begin to see the difference between craving and genuine desire, between addiction and authentic connection. And as this awareness deepens, you begin to reclaim your energy. You stop giving it away to someone who cannot reciprocate. You stop investing in relationships that leave you emotionally bankrupt. You start channeling that energy into yourself, your growth, your passions, your peace. And in doing so, you create a life that no longer revolves around the highs and lows of someone else's emotional availability. You start building a foundation where your happiness doesn't depend on fragments of attention, it rests in the certainty of your own self-worth. And that foundation is what makes it possible to recognize a new kind of love when it appears. Love that isn't chaotic or conditional, love that doesn't require you to chase or overanalyze, love that comes naturally, consistently, and fully. And while it may feel unfamiliar at first, it is the kind of love that finally aligns with the stability and emotional security your heart has longed for. And the most important realization of all is that this transformation didn't happen because they changed, didn't happen because someone else finally saw your worth, and didn't happen because external circumstances improved. It happened because you chose yourself. It happened because you acknowledged the patterns, felt the pain, and made the conscious decision to stop perpetuating a cycle that no longer served you. And in that choice, you find freedom, not just from the person who hurt you, but from the addiction itself. The cycle that once held you captive no longer defines your emotional world. You've reclaimed your narrative. You've reclaimed your boundaries. You've reclaimed your peace. And in doing so, you open yourself to the possibility of real connection, the kind that doesn't hurt and the kind that doesn't require chasing. Because the truth is, the person you were addicted to never owned your happiness. They never had the power to create it. That power has always been within you. And once you realize that, the pull loses its grip. The longing loses its control, the loop finally breaks, and for the first time in a long time, you can breathe, not just with relief, but with the deep, quiet certainty that you are whole, you are enough, and the life and love you deserve are waiting for you outside the cycle, beyond the addiction, and fully in your own hands. You've endured the pain, survived the unpredictability, and untangled yourself from the pattern. And now the rest of your life is no longer dictated by someone else's inconsistency. It is yours, all of it. And that freedom, that reclamation is the most powerful love story you will ever experience because it begins and ends with you. And once you step fully into that awareness, you start noticing the subtle ways your mind and heart used to be hijacked by the very cycle you're breaking. You notice how every interaction, every silence, every moment of inconsistency used to trigger an almost automatic reaction inside you. Your chest would tighten, your stomach would twist, and your mind would immediately go into overdrive, analyzing, overthinking, replaying, imagining. That reaction was not weakness, it was conditioning. Years of believing that love meant uncertainty had wired your nervous system to respond to emotional unpredictability as though your very survival depended on it. And now, for the first time, you can step back and observe it instead of being controlled by it. And the first step in reclaiming your emotional freedom is noticing these triggers without judgment. You feel the pull of missing them, the sudden urge to reach out, the replaying of memories that made you feel alive in a fragmented, incomplete way. You feel it all, the craving, the longing, the ache, but now you can name it for what it is, an echo of a pattern, not a reflection of your worth. You realize that the intensity you were addicted to wasn't a measure of connection or love. It was a measure of your brain craving stimulation and reassurance from someone who could not consistently provide it. And that realization changes everything. Because now, instead of chasing, instead of hoping, instead of trying to get them to show up for you in the ways you need, you begin to focus inward. You ask yourself the questions that were once uncomfortable. What do I truly need to feel safe and loved? What boundaries do I need to protect my emotional health? What parts of me were ignored, silenced, or overextended in this pattern? And how do I reclaim them? These questions are not easy, but they are liberating. They shift the focus from the external, the person you cannot control, to the internal, the person you are finally prioritizing. And as you explore these questions, you start noticing how much energy you've been giving away. Energy that could have gone into your dreams, your growth, your passions, and your peace has been consumed by a loop that rewarded you with fragments of attention. And that's when the anger surfaces, not the kind of rage that destroys, but the kind that opens your eyes. Anger at yourself for staying longer than you needed to, anger at the cycle that kept you hooked, anger at the false hope that once felt like love. And that anger is powerful because it fuels transformation. It fuels the refusal to repeat the same patterns. It fuels the determination to create a different, healthier reality for yourself. And then comes the subtle but profound shift. You start noticing how much you've grown emotionally. You start recognizing that surviving this pattern, untangling yourself from someone who could never fully meet you, and reclaiming your emotional autonomy is an enormous act of courage. It's not just about breaking free from a person, it's about breaking free from a belief system that told you your worth depended on someone else's inconsistency. It's about rewriting the rules you unconsciously accepted about love and attachment. And every small step you take in this process strengthens you, reshapes your perception, and builds a foundation for the love you truly deserve. And as you continue to rebuild yourself, you realize something essential. Your value is not determined by someone else's availability. Your happiness is not contingent on their presence. Your self-worth is not dictated by the fleeting highs and lows of someone else's inconsistency. And in fully internalizing this, you begin to approach relationships differently. You no longer seek intensity or drama as a measure of love. You no longer tolerate neglect, coldness, or distance disguised as passion. You no longer allow your peace to be compromised in the name of hope or potential. And that, more than anything, is the ultimate act of reclaiming power over your emotional life. And then, as you navigate new connections, you notice a remarkable clarity. You see potential partners through a lens that is not clouded by craving or addiction. You notice who is truly consistent, who communicates openly, who meets you halfway, and who values you fully. And you approach these relationships with discernment, not fear, with presence, not anxiety, with confidence, not neediness. And even when you feel sparks or moments of attraction, you no longer confuse them with desperation or obsession. You recognize the difference between genuine desire and conditioned craving, between authentic connection and old patterns trying to trick you. And the freedom you feel is both subtle and profound. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. It comes as a quiet confidence in your ability to choose yourself, to protect your heart, and to pursue what truly nourishes your emotional well-being. It comes as an inner calm, knowing that no person has the power to dictate your worth or destabilize your sense of self. It comes as peace, the kind that comes from finally understanding the difference between being attached to someone who hurts you and choosing someone who elevates you. And even though memories of the past may linger, the longing, the intensity, the fleeting moments that once felt like love, they no longer control you. You can remember without being pulled in. You can feel the ache without succumbing to it. You can acknowledge the pull without acting on it. That is the essence of emotional sovereignty, feeling fully, but not being enslaved by feelings created by someone else's inconsistency. And as you continue this journey, you notice another transformation. The way you see yourself changes. You begin to treat yourself with the care and respect you once sought externally. You honor your boundaries, express your needs without fear, and cultivate a sense of self-worth that is independent of external validation. You start to recognize that being whole doesn't require someone else's approval, it simply requires your commitment to yourself. And that commitment is stronger than any craving, stronger than any old attachment, and stronger than any pattern you once thought you couldn't escape. And gradually, you begin to notice how this shift impacts every area of your life. The energy you once spent worrying about their distance or chasing their approval is now invested in your growth, your passions, your healing, and your connections that are mutual and fulfilling. You notice your clarity in decision making, your confidence in asserting boundaries, and your ability to engage with relationships from a place of choice rather than necessity. And in seeing these changes, you recognize that the cycle that once dominated your heart is now just a memory, a lesson, a teacher that helped you evolve rather than a trap that controls you. And the final realization comes softly, almost imperceptibly, but it is profound. You are free, free from the need to prove your worth, free from the compulsion to chase someone who could not fully commit, free from the addiction to emotional highs and lows that were never yours to own, free to experience love as it was meant to be, stable, consistent, reciprocal, and nourishing. And in that freedom, you understand that everything you endured, every painful moment, every longing, every heartbreak was not wasted. It was the crucible that allowed you to reclaim yourself, see patterns clearly, and build a life where love no longer requires compromise of your peace or integrity. And now, as you stand in that space of awareness, You feel the strength that comes from surviving the pattern, understanding it, and rising above it. You feel the clarity of choice, the peace of self respect, and the joy of living untethered from someone else's inconsistency. And you understand finally that the love you were addicted to was never the true measure of your worth. The true measure was always inside you, and now you hold it fully, unshakable, and free. The cycle has ended. The addiction has lost its grip, and the love story that matters most, the one that has been waiting for you all along, is the one you are writing for yourself. You are whole, you are enough, you are free, and nothing, not even the echoes of past intensity, can take that away from you.